A father's silence, a son's distance. Imagine spending your whole life building an empire, believing success would bring happiness, and then realizing the one person you built it for no longer speaks to you. This is the story of Richard Hall, a billionaire who lost everything that truly mattered. Not his wealth, but his son's love. For 8 long years, silence separated them. Fame surrounded him, but loneliness echoed louder than applause. And one day, when the weight of regret became unbearable, he decided to do something no one expected. He left behind his fortune and lived as a substitute teacher, just to understand the world his son had chosen. Can you imagine that? To walk into a classroom where no one knows your name. To face children who laugh at your simplicity while you hide the truth that you once ruled the boardrooms of power? He wasn't looking for attention. He was looking for redemption, to feel again, to understand again, to love again. In a world obsessed with titles and money, Richard's journey reminds us that the greatest poverty is emotional distance. How many fathers are rich in possessions, yet bankrupt in affection? How many sons grow up longing for presence, not presents? This story isn't just about one man. It's about us. About every time we chose ambition over connection, silence over understanding. If you believe stories like this can open hearts and rebuild families, help this message travel further. Comment below what this story made you feel. Tell us if you've ever lost someone not through death, but through silence. Because your words might reach another soul tonight, someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to change. And if you're watching this, remember, the world doesn't change when the powerful act. It changes when the broken choose to heal. Subscribe to our channel, share this story, and help us remind the world that no amount of money can replace the sound of someone who still calls you Dad. The silence between father and son. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of Richard Hale's mansion. He sat at the edge of his grand oak desk, staring at the dusty photo frame that held the image of a young boy. That boy was his son, Daniel, smiling, carefree, innocent. But those days were long gone. For almost 8 years, Daniel hadn't spoken a single word to him. No calls, no visits. Not even a text. 2. The world. Richard was a self-made millionaire, a man who built an empire from nothing. But to himself, he was a father who had failed at the only thing that truly mattered. He had everything money could buy: cars, mansions, companies, yet there was a hollow silence echoing inside his heart. His assistant knocked softly on the door. "Sir, the board meeting will start in 15 minutes. Richard nodded absent-mindedly, his gaze still fixed on the photograph. He whispered to himself, "What's the point of success if your own son hates you?" That night, alone in his study, Richard read the last message Daniel had sent before disappearing. "You never understood what I needed, Dad. You only gave me what you thought money could fix." Those words haunted him every single day. He wondered where he went wrong. Was it when he missed Daniel's graduation? Or when he forced him to join the family business? Instead of letting him teach, the one dream his son had always talked about? One evening, while driving back from the city, Richard saw a small public school on the corner of a quiet neighborhood. The sign read, "Staff needed, substitute teachers welcome." Something inside him stirred. It was irrational, maybe even foolish for a man of his status, but he couldn't ignore the sudden pull in his heart. Maybe this was his chance to understand his son's world, the world of teaching, simplicity, and meaning. That night, he made a decision that shocked even himself. He would live as an ordinary substitute teacher for a while. No chauffeur, no tailored suits, no credit cards with limitless power. Just him, a fake resume, and a rented room. He wanted to experience life as his son once did, perhaps to finally understand why Daniel had turned away. The next morning, Richard left his mansion before sunrise. He told no one where he was going. He checked into a modest apartment under the name Mr. Hawley. Not Richard Hawley, the billionaire, just Mr. Hawley. The smell of fresh paint and old furniture welcomed him into his new reality. It was quiet. Too quiet. But somehow, it felt right. At the small school, the principal looked him up and down. "You've got teaching experience, Mr. Hawley?" she asked. He smiled nervously. "Yes, ma'am. A few years of tutoring experience," he lied. The principal nodded. "Good. We're short on staff. You'll start tomorrow. The kids can be a handful, especially in Class 8A. He thanked her and walked out, feeling his heart race. It was strange. For years he had closed deals worth millions without breaking a sweat. Yet now, the idea of teaching children terrified him. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay on the small creaky bed, staring at the ceiling fan. He thought about Daniel's voice, about the laughter they once shared, about the walls that success had built between them. Maybe this journey was not just about finding his son. Maybe it was about finding himself. The next morning, he wore simple clothes, a plain shirt, old trousers, and a pair of second-hand shoes. Standing before the classroom door, he took a deep breath. The chatter of students echoed inside. He opened the door slowly. 30 pairs of young eyes turned toward him. "Good morning," he said softly. No response. Some students laughed, others whispered. He smiled awkwardly and began, "My name is Mr. Hawley. I'll be your substitute teacher for a few days." The lesson didn't go as planned. The students ignored him, joked around, and threw paper balls when he turned to write on the board. But amid the noise, one quiet girl at the back of the class caught his attention. She looked down, sketching something on her notebook. After class, he walked over and asked, "What are you drawing?" The girl hesitated, then showed him a pencil sketch. It was of a man sitting alone at a desk. "It's my dad," she said. "He works all day and never talks to me." Richard felt a lump in his throat. He whispered, "Maybe he doesn't know how to talk, but I'm sure he wishes he could." The girl smiled faintly and left. That night, Richard sat by the window, watching the city lights fade into the distance. He realized something powerful. Loneliness was universal. Whether rich or poor, everyone was searching for connection. And perhaps in that classroom, he had just met a reflection of his own pain, a child waiting for a father to listen. Lessons beyond the classroom. The days that followed were not easy for Richard. He had never been ignored before, not in meetings, not in life. But inside that classroom, he was invisible. The children laughed at his awkward handwriting, mocked his simple clothes, and tested every ounce of his patience. Yet each night he returned to his small apartment with a strange feeling in his heart, humility. He began to realize how little he knew about the world outside his golden cage. At lunch, he ate in the teacher's lounge, listening quietly to the other teachers. Most of them were overworked and underpaid, yet they smiled through their exhaustion. One of them, Mrs. Adams, noticed his silence. "You're new here, aren't you?" she asked. Richard nodded. "Yes, just filling in for a while." She smiled kindly. "These kids can be rough, but they need more than lessons. They need someone to believe in them." That night, Richard couldn't stop thinking about her words. Someone to believe in them. Maybe that was what Daniel had needed all along. Not a father who gave him everything, but one who stood beside him when life got hard. The next day, he arrived earlier than usual. He cleaned the classroom himself, arranged the chairs neatly, and wrote on the board, "You don't have to be the best. Just be better than yesterday." When the students entered, they stared at the sentence. One boy snickered. "That's cheesy." Richard smiled. "Maybe it is. But try living by it. It changes things. Slowly, the students began to listen. He didn't just teach math or literature. He told stories. Stories about perseverance, about choices, about courage. He never revealed who he really was, but every word came from his own experiences, the losses behind his wealth, the emptiness behind success. He noticed the same quiet girl, Emily, sitting near the window, always drawing. He encouraged her. "You have talent," he said. "Keep drawing." She smiled shyly. "Thanks, Mr. Hawley. My dad never says that." One afternoon, the principal walked in unexpectedly during his class. "Mr. Hawley," she said, "I've received some interesting feedback. The students actually like you." He chuckled nervously. "That's surprising." She smiled. "Keep it up. You're making a difference." For the first time in years, Richard felt something. That money had never given him purpose. In the evenings, he often walked through the park near his apartment. There, he saw families laughing, couples arguing, and children running barefoot through the grass. He envied them. Not their simplicity, but their connection. He had spent his entire life building walls. Now he was learning what it meant to tear them down. Weeks passed. One day, he overheard two students whispering near the lockers. "Did you know Mr. Hawley used to be rich?" One said. The other laughed. "No way. He's too normal." Richard smiled to himself. For once, he was glad to be seen as ordinary. That evening, he received an email from his company's board. They were worried about his disappearance. The message read, "Your absence is creating chaos. Investors are panicking." He stared at the screen for a long time before closing it. For the first time, he didn't care about market losses or numbers. He cared about something deeper, healing. He decided to write Daniel a letter. He didn't know where his son lived, but he wrote anyway. "My son, I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you know that I'm trying to understand the world you chose, and maybe, in it, find the father I should have been." He sealed the envelope, unsure if it would ever reach him, but it brought peace to his heart. One stormy night, there was a knock on his apartment door. When he opened it, Emily stood there, soaked in rain. "Mr. Hawley," she said, trembling. "My dad, he left again. Can I stay?" "Here for a while." Richard hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He offered her a towel and some tea. She sat quietly, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "He always says he's too busy. I wish he'd just look at me once," she whispered. Richard's heart broke. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Sometimes, adults get lost chasing things that don't matter. But it doesn't mean they don't love you. She looked at him and asked, "Did you ever get lost like that?" He smiled sadly. "Yes, and I'm still finding my way back." That night, after Emily left, Richard stood by the window, feeling the storm. Ease. He realized the universe had given him a second chance, not just to understand his son, but to change before it was too late. The mirror of regret. Days turned into weeks, and Richard slowly became a part of the small school's heartbeat. He learned the names of every student, the sound of their laughter, and even the patterns of their mischief. Yet beneath the daily routine, a deep ache continued to live inside him, the ache of a father who didn't know where his son was. One morning, as he was teaching literature, a student asked him, "Sir, why do all good stories have sad beginnings?" Richard paused for a long moment before answering. "Because sometimes sadness teaches us what happiness really means." The class fell silent. Even the most distracted students looked at him differently that day. Something in his voice, a quiet truth, had reached them. Later that day, during lunch, Mrs. Adams joined him. "You've changed, Mr. Hawley," she said warmly. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm learning how to live, finally." She nodded. Teaching does that. It humbles you. He looked down at his hands, once used to signing contracts, now covered in chalk dust. I think I needed that humility. He whispered. In the evenings, he began tutoring some students for free. Emily was always the first to arrive. She would bring her drawings and show them shyly. One evening, she drew a sketch of him teaching the class, smiling gently. "That's you, Mr. Hawley," she said proudly. He laughed softly. "You? Made me look kinder than I am," she replied. "Maybe that's because you are kinder than you think." Her words stayed with him all night. Kindness, a simple virtue he had forgotten in the chaos of business. He remembered the day he fired Daniel's friend from the company just because he made a minor mistake. He remembered the silence that followed at home, the disappointment in his son's eyes. He had been so blinded by discipline that he forgot about compassion. That weekend, while walking through the city market, he saw a familiar bookstore. His heart skipped a beat. Daniel used to love that place. They spent hours there when he was little, reading together in the corner of the shop. He walked inside, hoping to feel that old warmth again. The air smelled of paper and nostalgia. He picked up a worn book titled Fathers and Sons. The irony wasn't lost on him. As he flipped through the pages, a folded piece of paper fell out. It was a letter, handwritten, yellowed with age. It read, "Dear Dad, I hope one day you understand why I had to leave. I love you, but I can't be who you want me to be. Daniel." His heart stopped. He recognized the handwriting instantly. His son had left this letter years ago, and somehow it found its way back to him. He sat there, trembling as tears blurred the ink. The bookstore owner approached gently. "Are you all right, sir?" Richard nodded weakly. "Yes. I just found something I lost a long time ago." He bought the book, holding it close like a treasure. That night, he read the letter over and over until the words became a lullaby of regret. The next morning, he brought the book to school. During class, he told the students, "We often think success means having everything. But sometimes, success means having the courage to say you were wrong." He didn't mention his son's name, but his voice broke when he spoke those words. Emily noticed his tears. After class, she walked up and said, "It's okay, Mr. Hawley. My dad says crying makes us human." He smiled gently. "Your dad is right. And maybe one day I'll tell my son that too." Emily looked confused. "You have a son?" He nodded. "Yes, and I'm trying to find him, not just where he lives, but who he's become." That night, as rain tapped against the window, Richard opened his laptop and searched for his son's name online. Dozens of results appeared: articles, profiles, social media posts. But one picture stopped him cold. It was Daniel, standing in front of a small rural school, smiling with children around him. The caption read, "Principal Daniel Hawley launches new education fund for underprivileged kids." Richard's eyes filled with pride and shame at once. His son had built something beautiful. Without him, he whispered to himself, "You became everything I wasn't." The realization cut deep, but it also filled him with awe. For the first time, he saw Daniel not as the boy he lost, but as the man he had become. The journey toward forgiveness. The discovery of Daniel's photograph haunted Richard for days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his son smiling among those children, the same warmth that once filled their home before ambition turned everything cold. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly. His heart was torn between pride and guilt. He had found his son's purpose, but not his. Forgiveness. One Friday evening, he made a decision. He packed a small suitcase, left a brief note for the school principal saying he needed personal leave, and booked a train ticket to the rural town where Daniel worked. The journey was long and quiet. Through the train window, the world looked softer, slower, more human. He realized he had lived so fast that he had forgotten what silence sounded like. When he arrived, the station was small, surrounded by fields of golden wheat. Children ran past him laughing, their school uniforms slightly torn, but their faces glowing with joy. He followed a dirt path until he saw a small building painted sky blue. A wooden sign read, Hope Foundation School. His hands trembled as he walked closer. Inside, he saw Daniel, older, leaner, but unmistakably his son. He was kneeling beside a group of students, helping them read aloud. His smile was pure, his voice patient. Richard stood frozen at the doorway, tears welling in his eyes. Every instinct told him to run to his son, but his guilt held him back. He didn't want to interrupt the peace Daniel had found. After class, when the children left, Richard finally gathered the courage to step forward. Daniel, he whispered. His son turned slowly. The shock on his face was indescribable. Dad? He said, almost in disbelief. Richard nodded, his voice breaking. I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness. I came to understand. The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel looked away, his eyes glistening. Why? Now, after all these years? Richard swallowed hard. Because I realized success means nothing when the people you love aren't there to share it. I lost you once. I don't want to lose the chance to make it right. Daniel sighed, crossing his arms. You can't just appear after 8 years and expect things to go back. Richard nodded. I don't. I just want to see who you've become. To see what I missed. Daniel looked at him for a long moment before saying softly, You missed a lot, Dad. The two men walked together outside, under the fading sunset. The air smelled of earth and rain. Daniel spoke. Slowly, his tone both calm and wounded. When Mom died, I needed you. But you were at a business summit. When I failed my first class, I needed comfort, but you sent a tutor. You never looked at me, Dad. You looked at what I was supposed to be. Each word hit Richard like a hammer. He couldn't speak. Tears streamed down his face. Finally, he whispered, You're right. I failed you. I thought providing meant loving. But I never gave you what mattered most, my time. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened slightly. You can't change the past, Dad, but you can stop running from it. They stood there in silence as the sun disappeared behind the hills. That night, Richard stayed in a small inn near the school. He looked at the photo of Daniel he still carried in his wallet, a memory frozen in time. He wrote another letter, but this time it wasn't filled with excuses. It was simple. I am proud of you, Daniel. You built something beautiful. I hope one day I can deserve to be part of it. The next morning, he returned to the school with breakfast for the children. Daniel didn't stop him. He helped distribute food, watched the laughter, and for the first time in years, they worked side by side. During a break, Daniel turned to him and said, They love you already, Dad. Richard smiled. That's because they see what I see, someone worth believing in. Daniel looked down, unsure how to respond. The silence between them was no longer painful. It was healing. Later that afternoon, Daniel invited him to visit the new classroom under construction. We're building a library, he said proudly. Richard nodded, running his fingers along the unfinished walls. Then let me help, he said. Not as a billionaire, as your father. Daniel smiled faintly, the first real smile Richard had seen from him in years. We'll see, he said softly. That night, as Richard lay in his modest inn room, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. He realized forgiveness wasn't something you asked for once. It was something you earned, moment by moment, with honesty and patience. He closed his eyes knowing tomorrow would bring another chance to rebuild. Not an empire, but a relationship. The weight of redemption. The following days became a rhythm of small gestures, quiet, sincere, and necessary. Richard woke up early every morning, helped the children arrange chairs, carried boxes of donated books, and joined them during meals. He didn't tell anyone who he really was, and no one asked. For the first time, he wasn't Richard Hall, the billionaire businessman. He was simply Mr. Hall, the man who showed up when it mattered. Daniel observed him from a distance, cautious but curious. He could see the difference in his father's eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by humility. It was as if the man before him had been reborn through the pain of regret. One morning, a heavy rain flooded part of the schoolyard. The roof of the unfinished library started leaking. Without hesitation, Richard climbed the ladder to help the workers patch the holes. Mud covered his hands, rain soaked his clothes, but he didn't stop. Daniel ran toward him shouting, "Dad, you'll slip." Richard looked down and smiled. "I've fallen enough times in life, son. This one I can handle." Everyone laughed, and, for a brief moment, the storm didn't matter. That laughter, raw and real, felt like the sound of healing. Later that evening, as the rain subsided, Daniel approached him quietly. "You didn't have to do all that," he said. Richard replied, "I know, but I wanted to. I've spent my whole life paying people to fix things for me. It feels good to fix something myself." Daniel looked at him with softened eyes. "Maybe you're not the same man anymore." Richard smiled faintly. "I hope I'm not." The next day, the children held a small celebration to thank him for his help. Emily, the quiet girl from his previous school, appeared there with her sketchbook. She had moved to the area with her mother and had joined Daniel's school. When she saw Richard, her face lit up. "Mr. Hall, she shouted. He laughed with surprise. "Emily, what are you doing here?" She held up her drawing. It was a portrait of Richard and Daniel standing together, smiling. Below the drawing, she had written, "Sometimes broken things become stronger when repaired with love." Daniel stared at the picture in silence. Emily giggled and said, "You two look alike when you smile." The room filled with gentle laughter. And for the first time, Richard saw his son truly laugh, not politely, not out of obligation, but freely. That night, they sat outside beneath a sky full of stars. The air was cool, the silence comfortable. Richard broke it softly. "You built something beautiful here, Daniel. I'm proud of you." Daniel didn't answer immediately. After a long pause, he said, "You know, I used to dream of hearing those words." Richard's eyes glistened. "I should have said them long ago." Daniel turned toward him. "You can't change the past, Dad, but maybe you can help me with the future. We need funding for a new science wing." Richard chuckled. "Ah, finally. Something I can actually help with." Daniel smiled. "But I don't want money, Dad. I want your time. I want you to teach these kids about life, not business." Richard nodded slowly, emotion catching in his throat. "Then that's what I'll give you. My time." The next morning, he entered the classroom as a guest teacher. The children cheered. He spoke not about wealth, but about kindness, empathy, and choices. He told them that the greatest fortune a person could have was love, the kind you give freely, not the kind you buy. Even Daniel sat at the back, listening. Quietly, when the class ended, he clapped first. In that moment, Richard felt something more valuable than all his companies combined: forgiveness in motion. As the weeks passed, father and son worked side by side. They argued, they laughed, they rebuilt. It wasn't perfect. Real healing never is. But every brick they laid in the library became a symbol of something mended. The villagers began to call them the Halley brothers instead of father and son, because their friendship looked new, not old. One afternoon, while painting the last wall of the library, Daniel turned to his father. "You." "No, I used to think you didn't care." Richard smiled sadly. "I didn't know how to show it. Money was my language. But I'm learning yours now." Daniel laughed quietly. "Then keep learning, Dad. You're finally speaking my heart's language." And as the sunlight streamed through the open windows, illuminating the wet paint and tired faces, they stood together, father and son, two men finally free from the past, bound not by blood alone, but by choice, forgiveness, and love. The return of the name. Months passed, and life in the small town found a gentle balance. The school thrived. The children's laughter filled every corridor, and Richard and Daniel's relationship grew stronger day by day. A man who once built skyscrapers now built trust, one act of kindness at a time. News of Richard's new life eventually reached the city. Reporters began to speculate about his disappearance, his company's temporary silence, and the mysterious Mr. Halley teaching in a rural school. One morning, a black car appeared outside the gates of Hope Foundation School. From it stepped Mr. Walters, Richard's longtime business associate. He looked out of place amid the dirt roads and children playing football. "Richard Haw?" Walters asked, adjusting his expensive tie as he entered the classroom where Richard was erasing the blackboard. The students froze. Daniel looked confused. "Dad, you know him?" he asked. Richard sighed. "Yes, Daniel. He used to work for me. Or maybe I worked for him. Depends on how you see it." Walters frowned. "Sir, the company needs you back. The board is panicking. There's a merger on the line." Richard turned back to the students, who were now listening intently. "Tell them I'm not available right now," he said calmly. Walters blinked in disbelief. "Not available? Richard, this is your empire." Richard smiled gently. "It was. But now, this is my kingdom." He gestured toward the classroom, the chalk, the drawings, the children's hopeful faces. Daniel stood beside him, proud. Walters lowered his voice. "Sir, if you walk away from this deal, you'll lose millions." Richard's expression softened. "I've already lost more than millions, Walters. I lost years with my son. I won't lose another day." Walters opened his mouth to argue, but one look from Richard stopped him. For the first time, his boss looked truly free. After Walters left, Daniel approached. "You're really giving it all up?" he asked. Richard smiled. "I'm not giving up, son. I'm finally giving myself to something real." Daniel nodded slowly, emotion flickering in his eyes. "I think Mom would have liked this version of you." Richard whispered, "I think so too." A week later, newspapers across the city printed headlines. "Billionaire. Richard Halley steps down, devotes life to education." Some called him foolish, others called him a visionary. Richard didn't care. For the first time, he read about himself and didn't feel the weight of pride, only peace. At the school, things continued as usual. He and Daniel launched a scholarship fund for students who couldn't afford supplies or tuition. They named it the Grace Initiative, after Daniel's late mother, whose kindness had always been their unspoken bond. One afternoon, Emily approached him with another drawing. This time it showed a classroom full of students, Daniel teaching. At the board, and Richard sitting in the back, smiling proudly. She handed it to him shyly. "You're in the picture this time," she said. He smiled warmly. "I guess I finally earned my place there." That evening, Daniel and Richard sat by the lake that bordered the school. The reflection of the sunset danced on the calm water. Daniel spoke first. "You know, Dad, when I was younger, I used to imagine you sitting beside me like this. I thought it would never happen." Richard's voice trembled. I imagined it too, but from an office tower too high to climb down. They both laughed softly, the sound carried by the wind. After a long pause, Daniel said, "Do you ever miss your old life?" Richard took a deep breath. "Sometimes. The structure, the noise, the sense of control. But then I remember, I controlled everything except my own heart. Now, I don't need control. I just need connection." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "You sound like a teacher now." Richard chuckled. "Maybe I finally became one." When they returned to the school that night, the children had decorated the new library. Above the doorway, a wooden plaque hung with hand-painted letters. Hale Learning Center. Built with love, not money. Richard touched the sign gently, tears welling in his eyes. "This is your name now, Dad," Daniel said softly. "Not the one from the newspapers. The one that means something." Richard looked around at the smiling faces and whispered, "And it's the only name I'll ever need again. The echo of legacy." The following months brought change, not in wealth or fame, but in the way Richard saw the world. He found joy in the smallest moments. A child's laughter, the smell of chalk, the sight of Daniel explaining equations on the blackboard. The simplicity of life that once seemed beneath him now felt sacred. Every Friday, Richard taught a short class about life lessons. The students loved them. He spoke not from books, but from wounds. He told them that success without love was emptiness dressed in gold. He told them that pride was the most expensive thing a man could own, and the least valuable. And when he spoke of forgiveness, even Daniel sometimes sat quietly in the back, pretending to read, but listening closely. One morning, Emily came running into the classroom with exciting news. "Mr. Hale, they're writing about you again," she said, waving a newspaper. Richard laughed softly. "What did I do this time?" She grinned. "They called you the billionaire teacher. They said you gave up everything for a simple life." The students cheered, but Richard only smiled humbly. "I didn't give up everything," he said. "I gained what matters most." Later that day, Daniel approached him. "You know, Dad, that article inspired a few donors to help us expand. We might finally build that science wing." Richard smiled. "Then promise me one thing. Don't let it become about money. Keep it about the kids." Daniel nodded. "You have my word." As the weeks passed, Richard began mentoring older students who dreamed of becoming teachers. He taught them how to see beyond grades, how to listen to silence, how to notice pain behind smiles. He used to lead boardrooms. Now he led arts. The transformation didn't erase his past, but it gave it meaning. One evening, while walking through the village, a group of parents stopped him. They thanked him for everything the school had become. An elderly woman said, "My grandson never used to read, but now he waits every night for the stories you tell." Richard felt his throat tighten. "He's the one changing his life, not me," he said softly. But deep down, he knew that sometimes change begins with a single voice that decides to care. At home, Daniel watched his father's transformation with a quiet sense of awe. A man who once seemed untouchable now played soccer with children, fixed broken benches, and told bedtime stories to orphans. It was as if he was trying to give every child what he couldn't give his own son. One Sunday, they visited the cemetery where Grace, Daniel's mother, was buried. They brought fresh lily, her favorite. Richard knelt down, brushing the dust off the headstone. "I think you'd laugh if you saw me now," he whispered. Daniel smiled faintly. "She'd be proud, Dad. You finally became the man she always believed you could be." Richard wiped his tears. "I just wish I hadn't taken so long." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe we both needed the distance to find our way back." The sun dipped below the horizon as they left the cemetery. That night, Daniel invited him to speak at the school's annual celebration. Richard hesitated but agreed. The next evening, the courtyard was filled with families, students, and laughter. When his name was announced, the children cheered. He stepped up to the small wooden stage, nervous yet calm. "I once believed that a man's worth was measured by his fortune," he began, "but I was wrong. The true measure of a man is how much light he leaves behind when he's gone." He paused, scanning the crowd, the smiles, the tears, the warmth. "If my story teaches you anything, let it be this. Never let success make you forget who you are meant to love." The audience applauded softly. Some teachers wept quietly. Daniel stood at the back, hands in his pockets, smiling with pride. After the event, Daniel approached him. "You've changed a lot, Dad," he said. Richard chuckled. "Maybe. I just remembered who I was before the world told me to be someone else." Daniel nodded. "And maybe I can finally say this: I forgive you." The words hit Richard like sunlight, breaking through clouds. He didn't speak. He simply hugged his son, and for the first time in 8 years, it felt whole. Complete. The villagers later said that was the night the school became more than just a building. It became a legacy of healing, a place where broken stories found new beginnings. The bridge between worlds. The morning after the celebration felt different. The air carried a quiet peace, the kind that comes after a storm has finally passed. Richard woke early, walked through the empty schoolyard, and smiled as he saw children's chalk drawings still covering the walls. Hearts, stars, and the words, "Thank you, Mr. Hawley." He ran his hand along the drawings and whispered, "No, thank you." For years, he had chased applause from strangers, but now the simple gratitude of children filled the void those cheers never could. His days had slowed, but his heart had never been more alive. That afternoon, Daniel approached him with a letter in his hand. "Dad, you got something from the education board," he said. Richard opened it curiously. It was an invitation to speak at a national conference for educators. They wanted him to share his story, the story of a man who had once built an empire of money and now built an empire of minds. He laughed softly. They must have run out of real teachers. Daniel smiled. Maybe they just finally found one that teaches from the heart. The following week, Richard stood on a large stage for the first time in years. But this time, there were no investors, no cameras flashing greed, no graphs of profits. The hall was filled with teachers, young and old, listening attentively. He began slowly. "For decades, I thought success was about reaching the top. But what's the point of climbing if you can't bring anyone with you?" The crowd grew still. "My son once stopped talking to me," he continued, "and I deserved it. Because I forgot that love, not ambition, is what truly builds legacy." When he finished, the entire hall rose to their feet. The applause was long and heartfelt, but it wasn't about fame anymore. It was about truth. Afterward, several teachers came to thank him, saying his story had reminded them why they started teaching in the first place. That night, he called Daniel. "You were right," he said softly. "Teaching doesn't just change students. It changes the teacher first." Months later, Richard returned to the city for the first time since he left. The glass towers looked smaller now. The noise, the traffic, the ambition, it all seemed distant, like echoes of a life that didn't belong to him anymore. He met with the board one last time to sign the papers officially transferring his company shares to a charitable trust. The trust would fund schools and libraries across the country, including Daniel's foundation. When the final signature dried, he felt something extraordinary: freedom. Outside, a journalist approached him. "Mr. Hawley, do you regret walking away from your wealth?" she asked. He smiled kindly. "I didn't walk away from wealth," he said. "I just learned what real wealth looks like. The clip went viral the next day, but Richard never saw it. He was already back at the school, teaching. One afternoon, he sat on the bench under the banyan tree with Daniel. Children were running around them, shouting and laughing. Daniel turned to him. "Do you ever think about the old days?" Richard smiled. "Sometimes. But they feel like someone else's memories now." "You built bridges between two worlds, Dad," Daniel said. "Between the world of success and the world of meaning." Richard nodded. "Maybe that was the lesson I was supposed to learn all along, that one can build both, if he builds with love." They sat there for a long time, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the valley. Richard looked at his son and said, "You know, Daniel, when you stopped talking to me, I thought it was the end of my life. But it was actually the beginning of my humanity." Daniel smiled warmly. "Then I guess silence was the language love used to bring us back together?" As darkness fell, lanterns lit up around the school. The new library stood proudly, not just a building, but a bridge between two men who had once been strangers under the same roof. And beneath its sign, carved in small letters, were the words Daniel had added quietly, "For my father, who taught me what truly matters." The lesson that never ends. Years later, the story of Richard Heil became something more than an article or a speech. It became a quiet legend told among teachers, parents, and children. He had turned his empire into a network of schools across the country, but he never took credit. His name rarely appeared in the papers anymore, and that was exactly how he liked it. At the Hope Foundation School, now a thriving campus filled with laughter and dreams, Richard still taught once a week. His hair had turned silver, his steps slower, but his spirit burned with the same warmth. The children called him Grandpa Hawley. He never corrected them. One sunny morning, he arrived to find Daniel speaking to a group of students about courage. When Daniel saw him, he smiled. "Dad, I was just telling them how the bravest thing a person can do is change, not others, but himself." Richard chuckled. "You must have learned that from a good teacher." Daniel grinned. "I did." After class, they walked together through the garden where the first classrooms once stood. The trees were taller now, the benches freshly painted, and the laughter louder. "It's strange," Richard said. "All these years, I thought my legacy would be measured in buildings and profits. But it's in moments like this, small, fleeting, but eternal." Daniel nodded. "And it's not just your legacy, Dad. It's ours." That evening, the school held an anniversary celebration. The courtyard was filled with families, alumni, and teachers who had once been Richard's students. Lanterns hung from every branch, glowing softly in the night. Daniel took the stage first. His voice trembled as he spoke. "When I was young, I thought my father cared more about money than people. But today, I know he taught me something greater, that it's never too late to become who you are meant to be." He invited Richard to the stage. The crowd applauded as he walked slowly to the microphone. He looked around, his heart full. "I used to believe time was my enemy," he said softly, "that it was always running out. But time isn't against us. It's waiting for us to change." He paused, smiling at Daniel. "And when we do, it becomes our friend." The audience stood, clapping gently, not out of admiration, but love. Richard stepped down and hugged his son tightly. He whispered, "You gave me the chance to live again?" Daniel's eyes shone. "No, Dad, you gave yourself that chance." The following morning, Richard sat under the same banyan tree where he had once spoken to Daniel years before. The children played nearby, and the air smelled of chalk and morning dew. He closed his eyes, listening to their laughter, the sound that had become his favorite music. Emily, now a young teacher herself, approached quietly. She carried a new drawing, one last piece for the library wall. It showed Richard standing beside Daniel, surrounded by smiling children, under a tree whose branches reached into the clouds. At the bottom, she had written, "The man who taught us that love is the greatest lesson of all." Richard smiled, tears filling his eyes. "That's beautiful, Emily," she replied softly. "It's the truth, sir." He watched her walk away, then looked up. At the sky, the sunlight filtered through the leaves, warm and golden. He whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what heaven feels like. Not a place far away, but a moment where love finally stays." A few months later, on a calm autumn morning, Richard passed away peacefully in his sleep. On his desk was an open notebook. The last words he had written were simple: "Teach them with love, always." At his memorial, Daniel spoke through tears, but with pride. "My father spent half his life building walls, and the other half tearing them down. If you ask me who he was, I'll say this: he was a man who learned that the richest people are those who give everything away, and the poorest are those who never give their hearts." The crowd remained silent for a long time, letting the words sink in. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, as if whispering the same lesson over and over. Years later, when new teachers joined the foundation, they were told the story of the man who had once been a billionaire and became a substitute teacher to win back his son. And whenever a student asked, "Was he real?" the teachers would smile and point toward the library's plaque that read, "Built in memory of Richard Howe, the man who taught the world what wealth truly means." And in that simple truth, his lesson lived on, endlessly, quietly, forever.